If you've ever wanted to become an environment artist, well, now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Environment Artist Survival Kit, a brand new course designed to take you from a complete beginner to an absolute master in Unreal Engine. You're going to be creating everything you see on the screen here. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, early bird pricing is just starting. The course has just dropped. So if you want to get the course at a reduced price, hop on right now and grab it before it's too late. Let's get into the video.
Hi, I'm Cynthia and I'm a 3D artist. This is one of my recent projects, and in this video I'll be walking you through my usual workflow. Lately I've been hooked on travel vlogs and I thought, why not use that as inspiration? This project pulls a lot from European towns, medieval architecture and Ghibli-inspired colors. So with this project, there are a few points that I wanted to achieve. First is to create a bigger environment for my portfolio. And then the second is to learn and utilize Dreamsheet, as well as get comfortable with using Substance Designer. Whenever I start a project, the first thing I do is gather as many references as I can. I try to cover everything. Building structures, like how many levels there are, how they are stacked, and the overall shapes, layouts for Unreal Engine, things like floor plans and road designs, details, trimming smaller elements like wooden beams or windows, and then props and vegetation. Basically, if it's going to be part of the scene, I want references for it. Most of the time, I'll start with concept art as a foundation, usually from another artist. It really helps me keep the vision focused. But for this project, I skipped concept art entirely. While that sounds freeing, it can actually be tricky because it's easy to go off track or over-design. So to avoid that, I gathered detailed references and also made a separate board for the aesthetics. The other board will be about style, colors, and textures I wanted to use later during the texturing phase. So once I had my references ready, I jumped into the Blockout phase in Unreal Engine. At this stage, it's all about mapping out the space with simple shapes and figuring out proportions. For this project, I wanted a 2-level design, making sure the buildings at the back were still visible from my main viewpoint. And then I'll replace them with something more accurate as I go on. For assets like the plants, I took the time to break down their shapes and plan how many variations I need. Also examples of how I want to shape the flowers later. I wanted one of the vines to have a dangling section. And I also kept an example of how I wanted topology to look like as a guide when doing the topology later. For modeling, I mainly use Maya and switch to ZBrush for anything that needs sculpting. Make sure they have some thickness for sculpting later. It needs a surface to work on. Just any plane will do. You can change the size later and then delete the curve. Reshape it as you like. Just use the move tool to push it around. Once the branches were done, I placed the leaves individually. Personally, I think it looks better if they have multiple layers, so try to stack the leaves. I ended up making 4 vine variations with slight differences in size and shape to keep things interesting. The Stonewall was pretty straightforward. I started with a cuboid, divided it into smaller sections, and used the clay brush to carve out the stones. Then I polished the edges with the edge polish brush and added texture using a rock alpha. For the bricks, I used edge polish again to create dents and give them a flatter, handcrafted look to keep it stylized. I try to avoid using overly detailed textures for this project to keep it looking stylized. For the trim sheet, I sculpted one roof tile, duplicated it, and lined them up. And then here's the rest of the trim sheet. To create a mask for the plant atlas, I used Marmoset toolbag. It's quick and easy, and I like that it lets you save the bake as a PSD file. So there are multiple maps that you can save, and the one I wanted is the transparency map, so just make sure that it's checked. Here's what it looked like. I used the same process for the vines too. And when it came to texturing, I started with the trim sheet. This is how it looks like after baking. I'll quickly show my layers. I start with the base and then a darker tone of the same color. The next layer will then be a color variation. I like to use analogous colors but change the saturation slightly. And then another color variation, orange, and lastly the moss. The concrete has more or less the same layers. I made sure to use the same green so it's cohesive. For the leaves, I focus on color variation rather than detailed textures. I wanted them to have that bluish tint you see in Ghibli-inspired scenes. Then I have hints of yellow and brown for contrast. I added it to my reference board so I could color pick directly from it while texturing other assets. The stonework relied heavily on curvature maps to get that mossy edges. I also used the same colors at the base of the doors and the stone arch just to tie everything together. Here's a quick look at all of the materials. Each one is a blend of techniques I picked up from the tutorials I'll be listing next. So these are the tutorials that I use, and they were super helpful if you're just starting with it like me. For the scene layout, I focus on balancing the foreground, midground, and background. I find that a still render looks best when there's a clear sense of depth, like having something positioned very close to the camera. It's also important to keep the silhouettes distinct by varying the heights of elements to avoid overlap. I always keep the big, medium, and small composition principle in mind, which I've also included in my reference board. Here's a closer look at the vines I use throughout the scenes. I use them quite a lot in this scene, and they're actually rather low poly. And here's a closer look at the flowers that I like best. To make the final renders more dynamic, I added moving elements like the butterflies and the grass using Niagara in Unreal Engine. The butterflies are from Brady J Design. They are free and super easy to customize. You just have to drag and drop. I tweaked the colors and sizes to match the scene. For the grass, I made a simple bait texture in Photoshop and then color it with gradient. Make sure it matches the green in the textures that were already done. And don't forget the mask. Laying out the scene was all about balancing the foreground, midground, and background. As for the clouds, I use the VDB assets. If you're interested in learning more, Populous Art has a fantastic tutorial that goes in depth on how to use them. I'll just quickly show the results here. That wraps up this video. A huge thank you to Stylized Station for inviting me to share my process. This has been such a great opportunity to reflect on my journey and growth as an artist. I hope this breakdown has been helpful. Thanks for watching.